The title of my message this morning is The Evidence of the Resurrection. Now, right from the title, that might cause some to feel a bit squeamish, oil and water. I mean, the term evidence doesn't fit with matters of faith. A little boy in a Sunday school class was listening as the teacher taught, and she asked a question, Kate, can anyone define faith? And the little boy's hand shot right up and said, faith is when you believe something that you know is not true. How often are we really like that little boy? But understand this, that in the New Testament, the message of Christianity, and especially the resurrection, is birthed in evidence. Let me show you what I mean here from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And this is a very early book in our New Testament. Paul, who here is giving the message, and he says this beginning at verse 3. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter, and then to the 12, and after that he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. And so here, as Paul is delivering the message, he's saying, look, there are eyewitnesses. Most of them are still living, and as if to say, go talk to them. Ask them about their account. Why is this so important? Well, I like the way one pastor, Andy Stanley, says it. He says this: if a guy can predict his own death and resurrection and actually pull it off, I'm going with whatever he says. What a great quote. And I get asked as a pastor, hey, do you ever have doubts? Or look, doubts are normal. Are you human? But how do you deal with some of this stuff? I mean, it might be things like, well, hey, can you really believe that thing about this guy being swallowed by a big fish? Or, make it more personal. These days as we're praying, and there's this invitation in the New Testament in 1 Peter 5 that we cast our cares, our anxious thoughts on Jesus because he cares for us. And what a great promise. But here's the lingering thought. Well, is that true? And how, can Jesus handle these things? Well, here's where this statement comes in, because when it comes to the resurrection, look, if Jesus could predict his own death and his own resurrection and pull it off, I'm going with whatever he says. And so when I struggle, when I'm not sure, when I have doubts about things that I might read in the Scriptures, I'm like, look, I'm with Jesus because he could do this. Those things that make me anxious and just the circumstances of our day. Look, I'm trusting that I can cast these cares, these burdens on him, and he'll handle them. He'll take them because he cares for me. Well, how do I know? Well, it goes back to the evidence of the resurrection. If he could do that, he can certainly take my thing. Now, I said that my friend Kurt is an apologist. A Christian apologist isn't someone who goes around apologizing, but is someone who gives a rational defense, evidence for the message of Christianity. In this case, we're speaking about the resurrection. Now, I'm not an apologist. I love apologetics. I've got books on my shelf. I've taken classes, listened to podcasts. And forming up this morning are three books that I have in modern era, almost 3 generations. And the first one is this, a book written by Frank Morison, and it was written in 1930. It's entitled, Who Moved the Stone? Now, Frank Morison was an investigative journalist, but he was not a Christian. In fact, he was agnostic and wanted to actually set out to prove the mythology of the Christian message, especially the resurrection. And he begins his book with this phrase, the book that refused to be written. Because as he examined the evidence, he became a follower of Jesus. Then moving on, next generation, Josh McDowell. Josh McDowell wrote a book, wrote many books, but his book, More Than a Carpenter, when he was a law student, agnostic of Christianity, and was challenged by some fellow students to examine the evidence for the Christian message, especially the resurrection. First, he scoffed at it, and then he did it, and then has become an evangelist, wanting others in, sharing the evidence that he's discovered for the Christian message, and especially the resurrection. And then more recently is Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel was the Chicago Tribune law reporter, won awards. His wife became a Christian, and that ticked him off. And so he set out to write a book to, debunk her newfound faith. And in doing so, in examining the evidence, he too gave his life to Christ. And his book, A Case for Christ, that was published in 1998, but just in the last couple of years became a movie and just influenced so many. And so here's what I'm going to do this morning. I'm not going to do the message that Kurt would have done, but I want to give an overview of these evidences for the resurrection. And I'm helped by another apologist, Frank Turk, and his outline that I'll use. It's just a brief overview, but I'm going to post on Facebook and also on our website some links to some more scholarly articles, videos, messages. Because I want you to be able to dig in and examine these things for yourself. And so what we want to do this morning is that we're going to look at 6 evidences for the resurrection. Now, this is just an overview. Again, I'll post links to more scholarly, but I want to start out, and they begin with E to help us follow along. And the very first one is this: early testimony. Understand this is that the letter of 1 Corinthians and Mark's gospel are believed to be the earliest books in our New Testament. And all of the gospel accounts here are completed by 70 AD. And so that means Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels, that their accounts are written early. Now that's so important because if you're going to make up a story, you need time to get all the details together. But instead, they're reporting early. And that relates to the second is this, and that is eyewitness testimony. That the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and John, saw and heard what they later wrote about. And we read from 1 Corinthians 15 how there are 500 eyewitnesses all at the same time. Now that's so important because of cross-examination. Go investigate. You can ask. They're writing from this eyewitness testimony, and they're writing early. Just could you imagine being a Phillies fan, and you're talking to some Yankees fan who have been at a game at Yankee Stadium, and you make some claim and make this statement, as you well know. Well, they better know if you have eyewitness accounts because it's going to be cross-examined. And that's what we have as evidence for the resurrection. The next one is embarrassing testimony. I mean, if you're going to make up a story, don't you put yourself in good light? Yet what we see of the disciples, the followers of Jesus, is that leading up to the cross and the resurrection, they don't understand, and they're constantly questioning him. We also see that they were rebuked by Jesus. Again, if you were going to make up a story, you're going to put yourself in good light. One of the other things we see is that the first eyewitnesses of the resurrection, they're to go to the tomb when Jesus isn't present, is a woman and women. Now, in our day, that doesn't mean a whole lot. But in the day that the New Testament was written, you would not trust a woman's testimony. And so if you were making up the story and you wanted people to believe it, you're not gonna make it up that a woman is the first to be an eyewitness. Number 4 is this: excruciating testimony. Excruciating means out of the crucifixion. Understand this, that most of the writers of the New Testament and most of these eyewitness accounts signed their testimony with their blood. One who did not was John and his testimony. But while John didn't die, wasn't martyred, he was boiled in oil and left as an exile on the island of Patmos. And so he was willing to put his blood, his life, and to sign that testimony with their own blood. Could you imagine? And here, they had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Why would they die for a known lie? Except they believed it to be true because they were eyewitnesses. Expected testimony. Now, what this speaks to is that early on, they were eyewitnesses, they were willing to give their life for what they wrote, and you see that their accounts line up with each other. And this is a day before, we have the media that we have today, and so their accounts align with each other. And the sixth piece of evidence is extra biblical testimony. And that means historians like the Jewish historian Josephus, writing about Christ and Christianity. Okay, well, there's some evidence for the resurrection. And again, I want you to follow the links. If you've got questions, go ahead and dig in and do some research. And there's varying degrees of scholarly accounts that I've shared links with. I also want to invite you, maybe you've got some questions, and I want to invite you to not go it alone. Lee Strobel, one of the apologists, authors that I mentioned, his book, A Case for Christ, a section of that book dealing with the resurrection has been printed as its own book called The Case for Easter. And we're going to do an online small group and go through that book together. And if you'd like to be part of that, and you're watching by Facebook Live, go ahead and message us. Or if you're watching through our website, sunburybiblechurch.org, send me an email, sbcpastor@ptd.net, and say, hey, I'd like to be part of that group. And I'd love to go on a journey with you as you examine more closely the evidence for the resurrection. But what does it mean? Not only is there evidence for the resurrection, what's the evidence of the resurrection? Remember what Andy Stanley said is that, hey, if a guy can predict his own death and resurrection and pull it off, I'm going with what he has to say. And what is it he has to say? And the first thing that I want to say this is that God loves you. And he designed you for a purpose. God demonstrated, he proved his love for you by sending Jesus to give his life for you as a sacrifice. The resurrection is proof of God's love. How do you know it worked? I mean, if Jesus died on the cross and that was for me to rescue me, how do I know it worked? Well, God raised him from the dead. And it's also proof that God designed you for a purpose. He has a plan for you. You can trust him. How do you know? Because of the resurrection. Now, his plan is evident, is experienced in our life through a relationship with Jesus. See, God not only loves you, he wants a relationship with you. And that's what Jesus did. And how do we experience that? How can this relationship, I be part of this? Well, it's through Jesus. If you're listening to this, watching this morning, and you want to know more about a relationship with Jesus, or maybe you're, hey, I'm ready. I want to help you with that. Please, message me. Send me an email, sbcpastor@ptd.net, and I'd love to journey with you and show you how you can have this relationship with Jesus. Just look at a Bible together with you. Or maybe there's that Christian friend that you have, and go ahead and say, hey, the resurrection, if God would do that for me, then I want to know him. Will you help me? I'd love to do that. But there's one other thing. Why does this matter so much? Well, it matters because hope wins. Hope wins. It's so important for us. We often use the word hope as a verb, don't we? We always, I hope my friend gets well. I hope I don't get sick. Whatever, we use hope as a verb, and it's an important one. But so often, the New Testament writers use hope as a noun, our hope. And see, the resurrection is hope and evidence that you can take God at his word. Cast your cares, your anxiety on him because he cares for you. If you read down further there in 1 Corinthians 15, you see that Jesus' resurrection is the first fruit. Now, if there's a first, what does that mean? Is that there's more to come. And that more to come includes you. Hope wins. That's not just pie in the sky wishful thinking. You have the evidence of Jesus' resurrection. There's more. And God has that for you. He has a purpose and a plan for your life. And you can walk in that. How do you know? Because of the resurrection. Now, when we take time to have a talk like this and we open up the scriptures, it's not merely to inform our minds. It's to lead to, a response, an action on our part. That we hear the scriptures and then we respond to the scriptures. That results in life change. Now, our first step here in responding is in worship. And so I want to invite you to do this. Holly's got one more song for us. See, our King is alive. That's why we can trust him. And so wherever you are, go ahead and stand up. Sing aloud and sing along and sing loud. You say, well, my family might hear you. Might hear me. Well, they already know you're a little bit, strange, because we all are. But it's okay. Raise your hands in worship and let's respond because our King is alive. And whatever's we're facing, the hardships that come our way, the trial that comes our way, we can trust God to be with us every single step. Hey, if I can help you any way spiritually, please reach out. Let's respond. Let's sing together.